They called her a mistake. Threw her out with her suitcase in silence. But when the private jet touched down, and her billionaire father stepped out, everyone remembered her name. If you're ready to hear the whole story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because, tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as crazy as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let's get into it. The silk napkins were monogrammed. The chandeliers glowed like frozen sunlight. And not a single soul at the long marble table looked up when Sophia placed the dessert tray down. She wasn't the help. She was the daughter-in-law. But in this house, the line blurred quickly. "Too much sugar, Sophia," said Patricia, her mother-in-law, without making eye contact. "Daniel has been watching his weight." Sophia gave a polite nod. "I'll switch it out." Daniel, her husband of 3 years, said nothing. He didn't even glance at her. She carried the tray back into the kitchen with the grace of someone who had practiced swallowing her pride whole. This was supposed to be a life of love. She met Daniel in college. Back when he was shy, kind, brilliant. He held her hand like it was sacred. Proposed without a ring because he said, "You are the gem." That version of him disappeared somewhere between the prenup and the family trust fund. Now, he was quiet in the face of cruelty. Polite in the presence of betrayal. He hadn't touched her hand in weeks. Later that night, as Sophia stood by the grand staircase, adjusting the hem of her plain dress, she overheard them talking in the drawing room. "She'll never be one of us," Patricia hissed. "She doesn't understand our world." Daniel's voice followed, lower. "I didn't marry her for status. She has no name. No leverage. Do you want the board to think you've gone soft?" Sophia froze. Then slowly turned and climbed the stairs. In her room, not their room, not anymore, she stared at the suitcase at the bottom of the closet. She had unpacked it once. Now, she was thinking about packing it again. The next morning, the staff buzzed about a private family celebration Patricia was planning. Sophia wasn't invited, but no one said it to her face. She watched from the kitchen as guests arrived. Wealth whispered through the driveway, black cars, tailored suits, perfume that lingered even after the wearers passed. Sophia stood behind the curtain. Unseen. Uninvited. That evening, she tried to talk to Daniel. She wore the pearl earrings he once said made her look like poetry. She asked to sit with him. He nodded vaguely, eyes on his phone. When she asked him gently, "Am I embarrassing you now?" he replied with a sigh that cut deeper than a yes. "You make things harder than they need to be." That night, Sophia sat on the edge of the guest bed, hands in her lap, waiting for something that wouldn't come. Not an apology. Not affection. Not even acknowledgement. Just silence. And the quiet hum of music downstairs where the real family celebrated. Suddenly, a knock at the door. It wasn't gentle. The butler stood stiffly in the hallway. "Mrs. Cross," he said. "You've been asked to leave." Sophia blinked. "What?" "They'd like you out tonight." He stepped aside to reveal her suitcase, already packed. Her hands trembled. She walked downstairs. The party didn't stop when they saw her. But the whispers did. Patricia stood at the bottom of the staircase with a glass of champagne. "You'll land on your feet," she said smoothly. "You always do, don't you?" Daniel didn't even meet her eyes. Sophia stepped out onto the steps in the pouring rain. No car. No umbrella. She walked with the suitcase dragging behind her, mascara streaking down her cheeks. For the first time in a long time, she let herself cry. They had stripped everything: title, pride, safety. She was no one again. But something inside her, small and burning, whispered, "You were never nothing." A low hum. Headlights lit up the driveway. A sleek black SUV rolled to a stop beside her. The window lowered. A voice she hadn't heard in 15 years said, "Sophia? He's waiting." He said it's time. She turned. The driver stepped out and opened the door. Inside was her father's signet ring, resting on the leather seat. And a single sentence engraved on the door frame. "Blood remembers." The inside of the SUV smelled like leather and memory. Sophia sat stiffly in the back seat, soaked dress clinging to her knees. Her hands were clasped, knuckles white. She hadn't said a word. Neither had the man beside her, Mr. Whitaker, her father's longtime assistant. He looked older, more tired than she remembered. But his presence was steady, like stone beneath water. They didn't speak for the entire ride. The silence wasn't awkward. It was heavy. The car rolled onto a tarmac. No terminal. Just tarmac. A jet waited, humming quietly against the night. A man stood at the top of the stairs, coat billowing in the wind, posture sharp. Sophia's breath caught. Alexander Grant. Her father. She stepped out slowly. He didn't move toward her. Didn't run. Didn't cry. Just watched. When she reached the stairs, she paused. "You didn't come when she died," she said, voice barely audible over the wind. His jaw clenched. "I wasn't allowed to." "By who?" she snapped, suddenly angry. "Who stops a father from burying his wife?" He took one step forward. "The same woman who begged me to keep you out of this world." She froze. Inside the jet, the lights were low. No gold. No velvet. Just clean lines, deep navy seats, silence. He poured her tea. Still no apology. Still no "I missed you." Just silence. And then, "They hurt you." A statement. Not a question. Sophia looked away. "I was fine." "No," he said. "You were surviving. There's a difference." She stared out the window. "Why now?" she whispered. He didn't answer right away. "Because the moment I saw that video, I saw your mother's eyes looking back at me. And I realized I broke my promise." She blinked. Her voice cracked. "What promise?" "That I'd never let anyone throw you away." The jet lifted off. She was shaking. Not from fear. From unraveling. "You're a billionaire," she said suddenly. "And you let me be nothing." "I let you be free," he answered. "Your mother swore you'd be better off without the press, the cameras, the whispers. So I gave her that. I watched from afar. Watched. I paid for your school, anonymously. Donated to your university. Bought the bookstore you worked at when it almost closed." Sophia stared. "Why didn't you just come back?" He looked her dead in the eyes. "Because I thought love meant giving space. Now I know, sometimes it means showing up anyway." Broken heart flashback. Sophia, age 10, at a dance recital. One seat was always empty in the back row. She used to pretend her father was sitting there. Turns out he just never came in. Back in the present, Sophia whispered, "You weren't supposed to come back like this." He responded gently, "And they weren't supposed to throw you out like trash." She didn't forgive him that night. But she didn't get off the plane either. When the jet landed, a silver car was waiting on the runway. Not a limo. A simple sedan. She stepped inside, not knowing if she was arriving or escaping. But for the first time in years, she wasn't walking alone. The estate was nothing like her in-laws' mansion. No marble. No showy chandeliers. Just a coastal villa tucked into the cliffs, where wind and waves never asked for permission. Sophia stood barefoot in the hallway. The walls were lined with paintings, not expensive ones. Childhood drawings. Framed. Preserved. Her own. "I asked your mother to send me one every year," Alexander said quietly behind her. She didn't turn around. Later, at breakfast, the silence between them stretched long and stiff. The staff served quietly, as if trained in how not to exist. Sophia sipped her coffee without tasting it. Alexander folded his napkin precisely, then said, "You don't have to stay." She looked up. "I don't have anywhere else." "That's not why I said it." He met her eyes. "I don't want to trap you into forgiveness." She didn't answer. But later that afternoon, she asked where the library was. It was down the hall, sunlit and warm. She stayed there most of the day. That evening, a box waited at her door. No note. Inside was her mother's old music box. She hadn't seen it in 2 decades. When she turned the crank, it still played the lullaby she used to fall asleep to. She sat on the floor. She cried silently. But she didn't return the box. They didn't speak much for 2 days. Sophia wandered the villa like someone walking through a dream they weren't ready to wake from. She didn't ask questions. He didn't push answers. On the 3rd morning, she found him on the back terrace. The ocean roared below. He was reading a leather-bound notebook. When she approached, he handed it to her. "I kept this," he said, "since the day I left." Inside were photos, letters, newspaper clippings of her school awards, notes from teachers, a strand of her baby hair taped to the first page. "I missed everything. But I missed nothing." She closed the book carefully, then said, "You left anyway." His eyes didn't flinch. "I did." She nodded. "Then let's not pretend this is something it isn't. Can you truly reconnect with someone who once chose to walk away? Drop your thoughts below. Rebuilding takes more than time, it takes truth. That night, Alexander hosted a dinner. Just the two of them. She showed up late. No makeup. Hair down. Wearing an old oversized sweatshirt from college. He didn't comment. She didn't apologize. They ate in silence. Until she asked, "Why didn't you fight harder to be in my life?" He paused. Then answered with something raw. "Because I didn't think I deserved to be." For the first time, her walls didn't rise. She didn't forgive him. But she started listening. Still, when she went to bed that night, she locked the door. And placed the music box on the table like a guardian. She didn't fully trust the house. She didn't fully trust him. But she didn't feel unwanted anymore. That was new. The storm rolled in on a Thursday morning. Winds swept across the coast. Flights were grounded. Roads were blocked. Sophia stood at the window, watching waves slam against the cliffs. "I'm stuck here, aren't I?" she murmured. Alexander, behind her, sipped his coffee and replied without looking. "You were never trapped. Not here." She didn't respond. But she didn't move either. The next few days blurred together. Power flickered. Cell service dropped. The villa shrunk in size. Walls closer. Rooms quieter. There was nowhere to hide. One evening, the generator failed. No electricity. No internet. Just candles and an old record player. Sophia found him in the sitting room, winding the turntable. "What's that?" she asked. "Your mother's favorite album," he said, setting the needle down. "Classical. So familiar." She sat down, hesitantly. They listened for a while in silence. After a few minutes, she said, "I forgot what silence without tension sounds like." He nodded, slowly. Most people never hear it. In the candlelight, she looked less like a woman discarded, and more like one rediscovering the edges of her strength. He noticed, but said nothing. The next day, she found a journal in the library. Blank pages. Expensive paper. A note inside. For what's next? She didn't write in it, but she kept it near. They started having coffee together every morning. Quietly. Not like father and daughter. Not yet. More like two people choosing peace, one sip at a time. On the fourth day of the storm, the pantry shelf collapsed. Glass shattered. Sophia rushed in to help, only to slice her palm open on a shard. Blood. Sharp and fast. Alexander moved quicker than she expected, grabbing a towel, wrapping her hand. "You need stitches," he muttered, examining the wound. She looked up at him, startled by the fear in his face. He looked away. "I'm not losing you again." At the small private clinic, as the nurse stitched her hand, Alexander sat in the corner. He looked small. Not powerful. Not unreachable. Just a man who waited too long to protect his daughter. Later that night, back at the villa, he poured her tea. Herbal. Calming. "You still like chamomile?" he asked. She raised a brow. "How do you even know that?" He shrugged, almost shy. "I paid attention. I just didn't know how to show it." She sipped the tea. Said nothing. But she didn't push him away. That night, Sophia wrote her first words in the journal. "Maybe I wasn't unlovable. Maybe they were just unequipped." She didn't sign it. But the page felt lighter when she closed it. By the time the roads reopened and the clouds cleared, she wasn't in a hurry to leave. She wasn't ready to stay forever. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't want to run. Sophia wandered through the villa's west wing, a part she hadn't explored yet. The halls felt quieter there, untouched by guests, untouched by time. A door stood slightly ajar. Curious, she nudged it open. Inside, dust floated in a golden shaft of sunlight. A study, maybe. Books lined the walls. A faint smell of cedar and old paper lingered in the air. And on the far wall, a photo. Framed. Her high school graduation. She stepped closer. She wasn't smiling in it. Her mother had taken the picture. Alexander was nowhere near that day. Or so she thought. But there, in the very corner of the crowd, half-shadowed, blurred, a man in a black coat. Eyes locked on her. Her breath caught. He'd been there. She turned, scanning the room. A locked cabinet stood behind the desk. She stared at it. For a moment, just stared. Then opened the top drawer. The key was waiting. Inside the cabinet were dozens of leather-bound books. Journals. All with dates. She pulled one. 2005, Sophia, age 11. Opened it. First page. She wore green today. Said she liked the leaves more than the flowers. Told the teacher they're stronger. Each page held notes. Observations. Letters unsent. A father keeping record. Not because he had to. Because he couldn't help it. Downstairs, she found Alexander reading by the fire. She placed the journal on the table. He didn't flinch. I figured you'd find them eventually, he said. She sat, quiet, then asked, why didn't you fight harder to stay in my life? He set the book down, took a breath, and said the words like they'd been rehearsed, not out of habit, but pain. Because your mother was scared. Because I was too proud. Because I thought if I waited long enough, you'd come to me. But I forgot, children don't chase the ones who leave. They just learn to stop waiting. He looked her in the eye. I'm sorry I made you wait. Sophia's voice cracked. She made it seem like you just didn't want us. I wanted everything, he whispered. I just didn't know how to prove it without burning everything down. They sat in silence. Then she asked softly, did you love her? He nodded, once. More than I knew how to say. Sophia stared into the fire. She died thinking you didn't. I know, he said. And I live with that. For a long time, neither of them moved. She finally asked, what were you trying to protect me from? He hesitated, then leaned back. From the spotlight. From enemies I'd made in boardrooms. From the press. The money. The rot that clings to it. He shook his head. You were pure. I wasn't. That night, she returned to her room. Opened the journal again. Wrote just one sentence. He never stopped seeing me. I just never knew where to look. Then she placed the book gently back on the shelf. Not to forget, but to make space. The next morning at breakfast, Alexander placed a set of keys on the table. What's this? She asked. He smiled faintly. Your office. For the foundation I've funded under your name. Sophia blinked. A foundation? For women like you, he said. Thrown out. Undervalued. Underestimated. She stared at him. Speechless. He added, you don't have to accept. But it's yours if you want it. Sophia didn't answer. But that afternoon she walked into the space. Right. Full of windows. And she stood in the middle of it. Not as someone's wife. Not as someone's daughter. But as someone who finally got to choose. The foundation office was still empty, but it smelled of promise. Fresh paint, clean wood, and wildflowers from the vase someone had placed on the windowsill. Sophia stood by the glass, watching seagulls wheel over the ocean. She didn't feel like a cast-off anymore. She felt like a seed, finally dropped into the right soil. Back at the villa, Alexander knocked gently on her door. Dinner? She glanced at the clock. It's barely 4. He grinned, awkward but real. Then it's very late lunch. They ate outside, wrapped in blankets, the ocean wind teasing napkins and hair alike. Sophia laughed when his wine glass tipped over. He laughed too, the sound rough and used. Later, by the fireplace, she flipped through an old photo album he'd pulled from storage. A snapshot caught her eye. Her, age 5, on his shoulders. Both of them laughing. You kept all of these, she murmured. I couldn't let them go, he replied. Even when I was the one who left. That night they played cards. Badly. He cheated once. She caught him. They argued playfully. Something new stirred between them. Not forgiveness. Familiarity. The next morning, Sophia walked the grounds alone. The sea air wrapped around her like an old friend. She realized she hadn't thought about Patricia in days. Hadn't thought about Daniel. Or the silence he weaponized. They were noise, she whispered to herself. This is quiet. Later she asked Alexander, "Why didn't you start a foundation yourself?" He looked at her over the rim of his coffee. "I wasn't the right face for it." She narrowed her eyes. "And I am." "You've lived it," he said simply. "People listen differently when you carry the scars." The words stayed with her. That afternoon, she drafted her first initiative. A fund for legal aid, for women tossed out of homes, jobs, marriages without warning. It wasn't just her story. It was every story. Later that week, the team assembled. Quiet professionals, every one of them handpicked. But they looked to her. For leadership. For direction. And for the first time, she gave it. Clearly. Confidently. "We don't rescue," she said. "We restore." That evening, Alexander watched her from the library door as she organized paperwork by the fire. He didn't interrupt. But he smiled. Softly. Proudly. When she caught him watching, she raised an eyebrow. "What?" "Nothing," he said, stepping back. "You just look like your mother." Sophia paused. Then smiled just a little. "She'd have liked this place." "She'd have loved you in it," he replied. That night, Sophia left the door to her room unlocked. Not because she needed protection. Because she didn't need walls. The invitation arrived by courier. Cream envelope. Gold-foiled text. Cross Family Gala, Annual Celebration. Sophia stared at it on her desk like it was radioactive. Daniel's name was on the bottom of the invite. So was Patricia's. She hadn't seen either of them in months. Alexander entered the office moments later, sorting through papers. "You invited them?" she asked. He froze. Then nodded once. "I did." Sophia's voice went cold. "Why?" Alexander sighed, setting his reading glasses down. "Because you're not just healing privately, Sophia. You're becoming public. The Foundation's launch is in their world too." "My pain doesn't need their approval," she said, heat creeping into her chest. "They don't have power over you anymore," he replied. "Exactly," she snapped. "So why do you keep giving it back to them?" He didn't speak for a long time. "Because one day, they'll tell the world a version of you. I'd rather they tell it to your face, and see who you really are now." She stood, shaking slightly. "This isn't about control. Or closure. This is about your pride." "Sophia." "No," she cut him off. "You want me to be seen? Fine. But not at the cost of dragging me back into rooms where I was unmade." That night she skipped dinner. Locked her door again. And cried, not because she was weak, but because she'd let herself believe it was finally over. That she'd never have to see them again. That she could move on without confrontation. The next morning, the launch press was all over the news. Photos of her beside Alexander. Of the foundation. Of the estate. And in the comment section, under one particularly viral article, was a quote from Patricia Cross. "Some people know how to marry for money. Others just inherit it." Sophia stared at the screen, her stomach folding in on itself. Then she shut the laptop. Downstairs, Alexander waited with coffee. Optimistic. Careful. "I shouldn't have sent the invite," he said without her prompting. She didn't answer. Instead, she asked, "Do you think I need them to prove I've made it?" He looked her in the eye. "No. But I think you might need you to know it." She walked past him, shoulders squared but heart trembling. Back in her room, she pulled out her old journal. The page from Act 3 stared back at her. Maybe I wasn't unlovable. Maybe they were just unequipped. She crossed it out. Not out of anger, but because she wasn't sure anymore. Had she healed, or had she just distracted herself from the scars? Can healing last if your pain gets dragged back into the room? Have you ever felt blindsided by your past just as you started to breathe again? Let's talk about it. This is where stories matter. Sophia packed a bag. Not because she was leaving for good, but because she didn't want to stay and pretend. She left a note on the dresser. "Don't find me. Just trust me." then quietly slipped out. The coastal town was quiet. Sophia stayed in a modest inn tucked between a bookstore and a bakery. The walls were thin. The tea was oversteeped. But it was hers. For now. No staff. No father. No crosses. Just stillness. On the second night, she walked barefoot to the ocean. The wind was sharp. Her scarf slipped away in the breeze. She let it. "You don't need to carry everything with you," she whispered. Back at the villa, Alexander sat in the study. Her room remained untouched. Her coffee mug unwashed on the counter. He didn't call. Didn't send the jet. Didn't push. Because this time, he knew what not to do. On the fourth day, a letter arrived at the inn. No signature. Just familiar handwriting. "Sophia, I invited them because I thought facing them would free you. I see now I was wrong to decide that for you. You are not here to impress ghosts. You are here to build something that outlives them. If you choose not to come back, I will still be here." Quietly. "Boys." She folded the note carefully. Kept it in her coat pocket all day. Touched it once before bed. Didn't cry. Didn't smile. Just felt it. That night, she dreamed of her mother. Not angry. Not pleading. Just sitting beside her. Humming the lullaby from the music box. When Sophia woke up, she whispered, "I'm not who you feared I'd become. I'm better." The next morning, she wrote her own letter. Folded it. Sealed it. Didn't mail it. Because sometimes, the words are only meant for you. She returned to the foundation office 3 days later. No announcement. No press. Just walked in and started reading grant proposals. The staff didn't say anything. But someone brought her chamomile tea. She found Alexander that evening in the greenhouse behind the estate. Tending to orchids. He looked up, surprised, not startled. "You're back," he said. "I was never yours to lose again," she replied. "But I'm here. On purpose." He nodded once. No apology. No fanfare. Just presence. She stepped beside him. Picked up a small watering can. Started helping. That's all it took. That night, they ate dinner in the greenhouse. Sophia lit a single candle. The air smelled like soil and jasmine. She didn't bring up the gala. Neither did he. But before dessert, she did ask, "Do I have to go?" He looked at her with something close to pride. "No. You get to decide who deserves your story." Sophia smiled, soft and certain. Then whispered, "Then I think I'm ready to tell it." The gala was quieter than expected. No flashing lights. No velvet ropes. No declarations. Just a room full of people holding champagne flutes, trying to guess who the woman in emerald was. She didn't flinch when she entered. Didn't search for familiar faces. Didn't shrink. She walked in like the storm never broke her. Patricia was there. So was Daniel. They stood by the marble bar, polished, perfect, irrelevant. Sophia didn't wave. Didn't nod. She just walked past them. And smiled. At the podium, Alexander said a few brief words. Something about legacy. Philanthropy. Future. Then handed her the mic. The room hushed. She looked out, not at enemies. But at opportunity. "I used to believe money was the most powerful thing in the world," she began. "Then I believed silence was. But I was wrong both times. The most powerful thing is a name, especially when you decide to take it back." Someone in the audience exhaled sharply. She continued. "I was married into power, then cast out of it. I was told I was disposable. Too loud. Too emotional. Too inconvenient." She smiled gently. "And yet here I stand. Not asking to be heard, but speaking anyway." After the applause, she stepped off stage. Alexander was waiting. He didn't say anything. Just took her hand. Held it for a moment too long. Then let go. Because she didn't need to be led. Only seen. Later that night back at the villa, they sat by the fire again. The music box sat on the mantel, wound but not playing. Sophia reached up, turned the crank. The melody filled the room. She closed her eyes. "I think she'd be proud," she whispered. Alexander's voice was soft. She always was. She reached into her purse, pulled out the folded letter she never sent. Set it in the fire. Not out of anger, but because she didn't need it anymore. She didn't need proof, or permission, or revenge. She had peace. And as the flames consumed the last remnants of what she carried, Sophia whispered to no one. They threw me out, but I walked back in. Not with rage. With rain. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.